working on is how to teach about emotions, to understand the emotions of others and how it affects their behavior, and how to express your own emotions with reasonable behavior. One of the areas within Asperger syndrome is that the child or adult is often under considerable stress, because the school is what I call a social minefield. That at any stage as you're going through that, you're going to cause a social explosion. Somebody will be upset, some will be offended, you've broken the codes of conduct, you get into trouble. You never know when it's going to occur, but it's going to occur. But nobody is guiding you through that minefield. But it's a minefield in a jungle where you're going to be ambushed by the bullies of life. So these kids are under enormous stress, because not only have they got to cope on the educational curriculum, it's also the social curriculum. And that stress may reach a point that they actually develop a psychological or psychiatric disorder, usually anxiety, depression, or anger. And that's what I want to focus on now, because it may be of considerable concern to parents, teachers, psychologists, and so on. Now, if we start with anxiety, now it doesn't mean to say that every child with Asperger syndrome is going to develop an anxiety disorder. It's just a risk if we're not careful. But it may come in waves or tides where the person is anxious, and may include panic attacks when they seem so flooded with anxiety. And it may be that one of the signs that we look for with anxiety is to retreat into solitude and the interests. And sometimes the degree of involvement in their interest is a measure of the degree of stress as they escape into their interest. So I use its dominance in the person's life and the compulsion to engage in these activities as a measure of how stressed the person is. Also, when anxious, you can get more rigid thought processes, more pedantic, more exact, more argumentative, etc. And very much more controlling the environment. And some can be quite tyrannical in maintaining control. But here they are trying to manage their own anxiety. And we've got to look at that anxiety born of stress, often in the school or work environment. And here we need to remember that with ordinary children, what I call break times and you call recess, is a time that you're supposed to be able to refresh yourself and relax, or enjoyment. So it's very important that there are opportunities throughout the day for solitude. It's not loneliness, it's just the opportunity not to be interrupted, not to have to socialize, and to relax in those occasions. So it may be that at lunchtime they have a particular quiet area to go to where the bullies are going to be excluded and they can play imaginatively on their own. Or some form of structured activity. It may be a chess game. It may be going on the computer. It may be going to the library to read about dinosaurs. But it seems to be a structured activity and supervised. For some, it's even doing their homework. May be an opportunity to allow the person to relax, to prepare themselves for the next time they have to enter the turmoil, the social, emotional turmoil of the classroom. We also seek islands of solitude, perhaps using what we call a secret code. The child can't say, "Excuse me, miss, I'm about to have a panic attack," or "I can't cope anymore." What you may have is that when they feel that their thermometer is rising for anxiety, because remember we talked about that emotion project, and you may have a project on emotion, about what makes you anxious, etc. What you have here is a code that when that child on their desk places their pencil sharpener at a particular point, that means I'm getting agitated. And the teacher will spot that and say, David, could you help me out for a moment? Could you take this message to the office? And the message is, there's no message, thank David, and send him back. So David goes out, goes to the office for 5 minutes, 10 minutes wandering all the way back, but in that opportunity to get out of the classroom and have a break, he's been able to continue. Or some form of responsibility when things are getting difficult. "Oh, David, could you help me with the computer? Could you do this activity?" Which is something that the person can do, but changes their thought processes, their activities, to keep going. Now, for some, the degree of stress is enormous. And they need what I call mental health breaks. That's not to say they're mentally ill. These kids are different. They're not mad, bad, or defective. They are just different. And so what we have here is that the term time may be too long, and they need a long weekend or a break to keep going. If they have that break, then they may well have the work set for that time to do at home. It's not necessarily a complete holiday from work in the academic sense, but it's a holiday from socializing, which is getting too much. For some, it's part-time enrollment, and they may not be able to cope with a full day, so they are there, perhaps in grades 1 or 2, for only half the day, and at lunchtime go home and do the schoolwork that's set, but without having to socialize. For some, especially as teenagers, when they are trying to socialize with the most dangerous creature on this planet, teenage boys, it's a disaster for all concerned. And here, the nature of friendship has changed, the school curriculum has changed, there are many pressures with hormonal, and we men have to suffer with our hormones. We suffer with our testosterone. So what happens here is that the child may be heading for, in the common term, a nervous breakdown, where there's going to be a tragedy, the person is maybe going to need severe medication or admission to a psychiatric unit. And what we have done for some is home tuition. And some people will say, well, you've got to socialize. Why have you got to socialize with teenagers? I mean, you can survive remarkably well by not having to socialize with them. But clinically, I have watched such children who have had home tuition because of their emotional fragility, or the circumstances have been very inappropriate, have been as equally successful or more successful as adults by not having gone through that component. So sometimes we do find that home tuition has been successful as long as you engineer social contacting, clubs, sporting activities and so on. They can still get their socializing. But if the child is not happy, they're not going to learn. And many parents are very sensitive to how fragile that child is emotionally, and is concerned that the options they are given is medication as one option, or psychiatric admission, because they know they're going to have a breakdown. So home tuition is something we have supported and developed the curriculum, and in Queensland we train what we call the distance educators or home tutors in how to support such children, because their home tuition is basically because of psychological stroke medical factors with that person. Each case must be viewed on its own merits. It may not be for all their school career, but it is a positive option that must be considered, but not a reason for education departments to negate their responsibility to support the person as the cheaper option. With extreme anxiety, we will use cognitive behavior therapy and medication. Now, within the cognitive behavior therapy, this is a technique developed by clinical psychologists to treat ordinary individuals who have anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic attacks, etc., or anorexia nervosa. And here we use techniques, psychological techniques, to change the thought processes. But it tends to be a very verbal process. Here we are changing it to, as Temple Grandin would say, thinking in pictures. And it's using pictorial activities that I've described to allow that person to control and change their emotions. But we also use metaphor. We constructively use their special interest. So we use that as a means of exploring the emotion. I'll give you an illustration of a child, well, a teenager, who's very, very anxious, finds it very difficult to cope at school, and has been off school for 2 years. Now, he has a special interest in Doctor Who. Now, in the United States, you may not know who Doctor Who is, but he's a television character of the BBC, and he's a time traveller in the TARDIS, and he goes back in time, forward in time, to new planets, etc., and he always picks up a scientist and a very attractive young lady as his assistant so that the men watch, and he goes and explores various environments. And so this child is a world expert on Doctor Who. When I visited his home, he has over 200 videos of Doctor Who. He has every Doctor Who book. He knows the script of most of them. His knowledge base in Doctor Who is extraordinary. However, in treating him, what I'm going to use is his interest in Doctor Who, that he is the Tom Baker, he's the actor of one of Doctor Who's. You are Tom Baker's Doctor Who. You have landed on this planet, and I am a scientist from this planet. But on this planet is an invisible monster. And this monster feeds on anxiety. And the more anxious and tense and frightened people are, the bigger the monster becomes. The more controlled, assertive and assured the person is, the more it shrinks. So you as Doctor Who and me as the scientist, we will overcome this monster so you can escape. So we use the special interest as a metaphor. So it requires a degree of flexibility in that. Also, when we're using cognitive behavior therapy with such children, we also use substitutes rather than eradication of actions to reduce anxiety. So whatever they may do in their repetitive interest or behavior to reduce anxiety, we're actually looking more at a substitute than necessarily totally eradicating that whole process. So the cognitive behavior therapy is being remodeled to help such individuals. For some, we use medication to assist. Now, the medication is often the standard medication, what we call the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRI. The pediatrician or psychiatrist will know what these are. The individual response varies from person to person, and the medication does differ. But what happens here is that the medication may improve the mood to allow the program to work. But because with anxiety, they've developed these rituals and routines to reduce their anxiety. And what they've got to do is trust that your alternative is going to be better, because they know how severe that anxiety is. So the anxiety may be reduced by the medication to allow them to trust your programs. But medication on its own improves mood, but does not change ability or circumstances. So you often need all in those. But unfortunately, the most common treatment is medication, not the management of the anxiety. And that's where it's an expensive, time-consuming business, but it is perhaps in the long term a much better approach. We also may have problems with depression. And here, the child is more depressed when they are interested in socializing. Early on, it's splendid isolation. I'm okay, I'm all right, I'm fine, I do my own thing. But now it reaches the point at some stage in the child's life, in elementary school or as an adult, some stage they will go through when they are more interested in socializing and aware of their differences and difficulties. And the child who's not as smart as they are is popular, tells jokes and they all laugh, is in the thick of the activity, and everybody else is having fun at parties and socializing, and they're not. And when they try, they're ridiculed, and it doesn't work, and people will laugh at them. So the ridicule and exclusion is heartbreaking for all concerned. And it's wanting to be like others, but not knowing how to succeed. Your intelligence gives you insight into being different, but you don't have the knowledge of how to improve your ability. So what we do here in the treatment for depression is social skills training, obviously to teach friendship skills on this. And so in a moment I'm going to go through a social skills curriculum that we've just been working on, but it's important that when that depression is identified, you also look at learning and psychological techniques, and it's social skills training. It's the importance of self-disclosure. If you've got a problem, tell somebody about it, because quite often they brood on their difficulties, and you know something's going wrong, but they won't tell you. And a problem shared is a problem halved. And many Asperger syndrome adults said, I thought you knew. when you don't if you don't tell me. It's encouraging friendship. It's a bit of rent-a-friend, etc. Remember, the child linked with the other with an interest in ants. Computer clubs is a wonderful way of people with Asperger's syndrome to meet each other. So we try and encourage friendships. We again use cognitive behavior therapy adapted in visual techniques for the depression. And again, medication may help. But one of the key features for treating depression is social skills groups. Not only to teach the actual skills as life skills, but as an antidote to depression. Now here, this is a social skills group that's almost complete. We have another 2 sessions to go. But this is a group of 6 teenagers, 3 boys, 3 girls, from different schools, who meet with myself and Michelle, a clinical psychologist, for an hour and a half every Wednesday afternoon. Now the hour and a half is for each session, and then another half hour we meet with the parents to go through what we're doing, the homework activities for generalization and so on. Now from my experience of such groups, a number of things I would suggest. First of all, you can plan session 1, but don't bother initially planning all the others, because you don't know what the problems are until they start talking. So you can plan number 1, and immediately number 1 is over, you plan number 2. When that's over, you plan number 3. Secondly, whatever time you think it will take to teach this skill, double it. Because what you take as very easy common sense, when you meet such kids, you think, oh dear, it's obviously more complicated and difficult than I thought. So our first session is on friendship skills, and this group was on what makes a good friend and the qualities that you have to be a good friend, plus the friendship diary that went through, and I've explained a little bit about that. But we then asked the group and the parents and teachers what are the major issues for this group, and then focus on them. So for this group, the next one was, how can you tell if someone likes you? Now they're teenagers, and that concept of who likes and doesn't like you is very important. And the girls have that in-group and out-group, etc., that can be quite complicated. So we work on compliments. That is giving them and receiving them. Now here what we've got to go through is saying something nice about somebody. And we found that when we went through some of these things, they were astounded at some of their qualities. They had a very negative self-perception of their social skills. And when we gave them positive comments of their social skills, but more importantly, genuine positive comments from their peer group in the social skills group, they were delighted with that. We did perspective taking, the point of view of other people, of reading the signals. And that's where we did the how do you know when you're annoying somebody and how to rescue the situation. The next one we had was again going back to friendships, was how to maintain friendships. How often should you phone? What should you talk about? Because some can be very, once they got a friend, that's it. They've cracked it and they dominate that individual and they don't know how to cope if they are playing with somebody else, etc. And you have to explain. A good friend allows their friend to play with other children. This does not mean they do not like you anymore. Okay? So it's how to maintain the friendships, how we keep going, etc. The next topic was very crucial to them, bullying and teasing. All of them had been bullied and teased in varying degrees. And we had to go through various strategies. And for example, with teasing, we had 2 in the group who had ginger or red hair. And we talked about how they had been teased with their hair. And of course, they don't understand this, they don't know how to respond, they take it too personally. And so, with this situation, we then brainstormed with the guys what we could do in response. And one of the things that we said was humor. So when somebody teases you about a negative comment about your red hair, we went through various humorous comments, and one of them was, when they say something negative about Carrot Top, yeah, my father was a matchstick, and to say something even more funny breaks the atmosphere. or not. We talked about an invisible force shield in that situation, like that monster that feeds on their fear. So we went through bullying and teasing and strategies. Now, of course, we have little projects to do in the week in between. So for each session, we don't call it a homework book because that's too school related. It's a project book, so that they have a summary of what we've done the previous week and activities to try it out. And that's why we then work with the parents and teachers and others, because it's got to work. No matter what you do in the social skills laboratory, you've got to engineer success when it's used for the first time in real life. Otherwise, they won't do it. So you've got to make sure that you have that liaison with other people. We went through criticism. Now, quite a few of them were very good at being critical, but receiving it was not very good. So we went through brainstorming, and one of the things we'd explain to them is when you're going to criticize, say something nice first before. You've done a really good job in that, but, etc. So you say something nice before you did. Or, I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but, etc. So they are learning subtlety in those situations of giving and receiving criticism. We went through conversation skills of when to interrupt and how to keep the conversation on track. And James came up with a brilliant idea, because we try not to make it that we are this omnipotent, socially skilled people, you are the socially inferior, and we will pass on to you all these skills. What we normally do is go through, Michelle and I, what not to do, and get the guys to spot what we did wrong and tell us what we should do. But on interruption, we were brainstorming what we could do. And James, very bright young man with Asperger's syndrome, was talking about interruption. And he said, I could come up and I could listen. And when somebody says something I agree with, I could say, I agree, and then I've got entry into the conversation, and we can change it to my topic. Brilliant idea. And another one, though, was we went through, and we said, you could come up, and we were role-playing somebody on the phone for this, and role-playing when Mum's on the phone and you're interrupting, and coming up to it, and he said, what could you do? And one of them said, you could go away. It had never occurred to them that you can actually go away and come back later. It was a revelation to them in that situation. So sometimes it's social common sense has to be explained. We went through characterization. And on this one, remember I talked in the diagnostic point that many don't understand the different characters. And so for this, we used animal pictures. These were actually American animals. So we had coyotes and all those sorts of things. But many Australian teenagers know all these animals and so on. We had them all over the floor, and we had a list of people like Mum, Dad, teacher, me, Michelle, etc. And we were saying to each of them, have a look at the pictures. Your mum, if your mum was an animal, what animal would she be? If your dad was an animal, what animal would he be? Now, we also had the teacher, and I must confess that a large popularity of animal of choice to describe a teacher was skunk or spider. For some reason, I was a dog, which means sort of friendly and happy. I said, well, why am I a dog? Oh, you're friendly and happy and smile a lot and wag your tail. So, okay, I'll agree with that. I'm a dog in that respect. So we went through characterization and how you have to change your response to the different characters. We also have to explain that their character may change. We had, in another instance, a teenager who tried to be friendly with another girl, and the girl was very offhand and nasty to her. But later on in the year, that same girl wanted to be friendly with the girl with Asperger's syndrome, who would have nothing to do with her because she had frozen in that mold of somebody to avoid, and that their character may change. We went through expressing emotion in body language, and we had a little game of a pack of cards, little handwritten cards with an action: tying your shoelaces, opening a birthday present, sweeping the floor. But another pack of cards with an emotion on each: happy, sad, angry, frightened. And what we did, in turn, choose an action and an emotion and act it to the group, and they've got to guess what you're doing and how you feel. Now, they were brilliant at the physical mechanics of the action, but I had to tutor them as a director in how to convey that in their body language. And some of the most obvious ones they had enormous difficulty conveying. So that was a great game of taking it in turns to spot the action and how does that person feel. Now that was session 9. Session 10, which I haven't written up there, was later on, was again brought up by the individuals themselves, which was secrets. Because for many teenagers, the currency of friendship is secrets, of whether you can trust somebody. And some with Asperger's syndrome had been trusted with enormously important information, and they were worried, what do I say about this, etc. So we talked about trust and secrets and confidentiality as a topic that they had brought up. And the most recent session we had was telephone skills. So what we went through was topics of conversation, that we all have general topics, the weather, something in the news, etc. So we have those topics, plus we went through for each person what they would like somebody to talk to them about. And we've written it all down, and while I'm away, their project is to phone each other up and have a conversation and see how that goes. Now within that group, several things have occurred. And one that we found quite interesting was that many were quite depressed by their isolation and lacking friends. Going back to James, a very bright young man who was on the borderline of clinical depression in terms of his sadness, while we were doing the sessions every week, had his birthday party. And he invited as his guests the other 5 participants in the group. Not me and Michelle, but the other 5. And at the end of they all brought him presents and they had a great time. They went out to Movie World or something like that. And at the end, when they'd just gone, he burst into tears. And his older sister said, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "You won't understand, but for the first time in my life, I have friends who understand in that situation." So that one sentence that was it for us. It's done it. We've succeeded in that situation. So what we've got to do is obviously help such individuals who are going through major difficulties. I now want to switch, if you can erase your mind of what I've been talking about, and now go, after a quick commercial break, by the book, to a new topic of the special interests and why they occur and what to do with them. They don't occur with all individuals, but they can dominate the person's time and conversation. And as far as they're concerned, they are so wonderful, they have an evangelical desire to convince everybody it's absolutely wonderful. But as far as everybody else is considered, medieval church architecture is boring. Now, there's often a fascination with statistics, order, and symmetry, and often they are making order out of chaos and cataloguing information. One person in England is famous for collecting every example of spark plug. And you may think, well, why? But he knows all about spark plug. It's amazing. So you may start off by collecting items. And these items are catalogued and put in the right position, and if anyone is missing, it's an absolute disaster, and they have to be found and so on. It can be a topic. Transport is a common one. Animals, such as dinosaurs, or electronics and circuit diagrams and the logic and engineering components. But some become so entranced with their interest, they live it. And this is where they may be interested in Vikings. And as a 6 or 7-year-old girl, that person then convinces their mother to make an outfit of a Viking. The pudding base helmet, the horns, and wandering around the village pretending to be a Viking ant, robot, or etc. Some I've known have wanted to be a horse and have wanted for tea horse food. I don't know, oats and things like that. So you have to be careful. They can become very involved in it. And I sometimes wonder at Star Trek conventions with a number of people dressing up as Data and Spock. Anyway, I'm sure you are thinking about that too. And there can finally be a fascination with an individual. It may be a historical figure, it may be a person at school, it may be a person at work, but sometimes a fascination with that individual. Now, why do these occur? First of all, remember I was talking about in Asperger's syndrome, there can be difficulty with conversation skills, how to repair it, what to say, etc. So here, the special interest facilitates conversation. Whatever question you ask, they know the answer. There is a fluency, a knowledge, which is quite important. And that garrulous enthusiasm allows you to dominate the topic. So it facilitates the conversation. If you don't know what to talk about your interest. It indicates intelligence. The worst insult for a person with Asperger's syndrome is to call them stupid. And many feel that at school they underachieve considering their intellect, because school is designed for the visual linguistic thinkers, not the visual logical. So it indicates intelligence, and they want to impress you with their knowledge base. And so sometimes when they ask these questions, I don't believe you. You made it up. It's a fib. And they'll get excited and they go away and show me, and they're always right. And they know these sorts of things. So it indicates intelligence. It provides order and consistency. And a lot of it is a taxonomy or cataloguing your stamps or all those sorts of things. And there's a wonderful sense of personal satisfaction in putting it into a taxonomy or league tables. And some may have an encyclopedic knowledge of football teams and know who scored what, etc. And of course, you're always thinking, what is the ultimate career? And I seriously wonder whether some sports commentators have this. And certainly if you're British, I suspect cricket was designed for people with Asperger's syndrome. It is an extremely boring game. You can only understand if you're drunk. Anyway, it's so slow-moving, etc. So, so it can be providing order and consistency of taxonomy and tables. It can be a means of relaxation. We had one lady whose special interest was the Japanese tea ceremony. Think about it. Order, symmetry, and predictability. So after school and eventually work for her, she would go through the Japanese tea ceremony, and I asked her why, and she said, it helps me relax. I would much rather the Japanese tea ceremony than Prozac. So if that's what helps her relax, fine. The Japanese tea ceremony is socially appropriate. That's okay. For some, it's an enjoyable activity. They really do enjoy it. And the eccentricity is appealing. And this is why the British have always accepted Asperger's syndrome more than any other country, because it explains Oxford and Cambridge University and the aristocracy. So it can be an enjoyable activity. It can be lucrative. And when we come to careers, some have become world experts in obscure topics that people need that information. Or in academia, it's considered important. So it may be the final career of that person. Now, how do you cope? Well, controlled access. Here, what we do is say, limit the duration. Have a clock or a timer. Now, you make it a clock because a clock is exact. And the person knows if it's up to you, they can use emotional blackmail to make you change your mind. So, buzzer's gone off. Time to finish. But it's the buzzer or clock that indicates the end. And out of sight, out of mind. When that person still has that unfulfilled urge to continue, it's very important that they change room, go outside, or some other activity to wipe away that thought or compulsion. So out of sight, out of mind, and obviously explain when the next opportunity will occur. It's rationed in a number of ways. We try and use it as a constructive application. Now, many with Asperger's syndrome may not be as motivated as others to please the teacher, impress the other kids, or compete with the other kids, or be cooperative. Their main motivation is the intrinsic reward of personal success. I did it, or it's earned access to something they want. And here, you may improve motivation and attention by incorporating the interest in the activity. So with a young child, if you give a maths problem of, I've got 4 apples and eat 2, how many have I got left? Who cares? It's apples. But if you say, for a person who is interested in Thomas the Tank Engine, Thomas has got 4 carriages, and Annabelle and, I've forgotten the other one, I ought to know them, Annie and Clarabelle, are taken away by Edward. How many carriages has Thomas got left? That's important, because you said the magic words, Thomas the Tank Engine. So what you do is you may teach the activity in conventional ways to the rest of the class, and then turn to the child with Asperger's syndrome and use their special interest within whatever you are teaching. So once you've done the magic words, it's relevant and captured it. Or you earn access by effort and compliance. So if you do 10 sums, 10 minutes on the computer. If you don't interrupt for 20 minutes, you've earned 20 minutes on the computer. So what you do is you earn access by effort and compliance. So if you tidy your room, then I'll give you $2 to buy a magazine on electric circuits, etc. It may be eccentric and unconventional, but at least it motivates the person. So we use a constructive application. We also find that it can encourage social contact and friendships by those clubs. The British train spotters, for example, do you have train spotters in the United States? No, I think it's a very British phenomenon. These are the people on the platform who are still there when the train has gone, and they collect all the numbers of the trains. And so in train spotters clubs, in your special interest, you have those friends. So it can encourage social contact and friendship. It can become a source of employment for some. And children with talents can be popular. So if you've got a very good artist or musician, etc., it's harder to expel them from the school when they've won a prize for the school in their particular area. And many kids who have a talent, their social oddities are excused. You know that nutty professor who's brilliant at whatever, but you accommodate their social skills because it's counterbalanced by their value in their special interest. So children with talents can be popular. And encourage an interest in computers. I'll give you an illustration with a young man who was lonely at high school. And I watched as we were coming in after the lunch break to the computer class. And all the other teenagers were talking about getting drunk and parties and intimate relationships with various. But of course he has many with Asperger's as teenagers have very strong moral values. They don't smoke, they don't do all those things, they're terribly bad. And of course teenage kids don't like that. But anyway, he was very much on the outer, not incorporated in that, not valued by the other kids. Then they had the computer activity, and a computer crashed. And they didn't know what to do. They said, "Oh, Chris, can you help us?" And the look on his face to be needed was worth it. And he came over, did this, unfroze the screen. "Ah, thanks, Chris, that was good." Because he was now popular. And now I asked the group, out of all you guys, who's the best at computers? "Ah, Chris is." And again, the look of satisfaction. Because computers now are not associated with nerds. Computers are considered a good currency amongst the kids. And many with Asperger's syndrome are brilliant at 3D graphics and designing their own programs. So I do say encourage an interest in computers, and can be a source of success and relaxation and escape. So there are aspects of Asperger's syndrome that can be used constructively, but do be careful at the transition between a special interest for pleasure that might become an obsession to reduce anxiety. And you've got to check the difference between the two, because there is the positive special interest and the negative obsessive compulsive action, that it may cross that border and may need professional help. Okay. Now, that's the special interest. There is now, if you can wipe your mind, I'm now going on a completely different topic, and that is that most of our knowledge on Asperger syndrome is on boys, very few girls. In autism, the ratio of boys to girls is 4-1. When you go to clinics and look at the referral rate of boys to girls with Asperger syndrome, it's about 10-1. The boys are more easily identified. I suspect those girls are there, but they're not picked up. I suspect, and this is clinical experience, yet to be proved by research, that those girls are there, but they're suffering in silence. And whereas the boys have a very odd profile, a conspicuous profile of social skills, the girls' profile tends to be more even and advanced, that they're often viewed as immature socially and emotionally rather than odd. They are less likely to become aggressive and so less likely to be referred on. And I suspect also the girls are better camouflaged in their difficulties by other girls who are very maternal and supportive to that individual. Another factor I would suggest is that some of the girls are better able to learn social skills and are very good actresses. And they learn by observation of who's successful, how do they dress, what do they do, and they learn to act. And so some, they have learnt a facade of what to do. They are still very confused, but they've learned in this social situation, this is how I behave, and it's successful. So girls may not be picked up, but may be suffering in silence. So it is a new area for us to explore, and certainly the clinic referrals tend to be for boys, but I would also add that the clinic referrals tend to be those that are going wrong. And some clinicians get an overly pessimistic view based on the reality of the referrals they get. And when you do a broad-based population sample, there are more successes than would appear to be from some of the clinic referrals. And I've got that experience from the many hundreds, if not thousands, with Asperger's syndrome I've watched grow up over time. So when we look at other factors here, what resources are needed? How do you help such people? Now certainly here the family and teacher need access to expertise. It's crucial. Once you've had the child diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, great, but what do we do about it? That chapter in your life is closed. We now know what it is, but we've now got to move on. And here the requirement is multidisciplinary specialists. There is no one professional group to have a monopoly on helping such kids. They need speech therapists because of the conversational, pragmatic problems. But in general, you could say that we're talking of communication in its broadest sense, of feelings and emotions too. So it's the broad aspect of communication. It's also dealing with the psychological factors of not only an uneven profile of learning skills, it's also psychological disorders such as anxiety, depression, or anger. And one of the things that we do find is that we talk of classic depression as somebody who has low self-opinion. It's me, it's my problem, it's my fault, I'm no good, I shouldn't be here. Or, in that recognition of not fitting in, they do the opposite. It's your fault, you're to be punished, you're to be blamed, you didn't right, you should have, etc. And we find that the person becomes very aggressive, argumentative, critical. And in part, they change from a Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde. And in some environments, home or school, usually school, they are like wonderful kids to the teacher. Oh, he's fine, he's wonderful, he's polite and nice. But he's like a compressed spring that gets tighter and tighter and tighter. But when they get home, it may be their mother, younger brother or sister who are targeted as a means of downloading their frustration in the day, but also they find it unacceptable to contemplate there is anything wrong with themselves, but there is with everyone else in the world, and that anger and criticism is actually an underlying depression that needs its treatment. So the psychologists may be involved with anger management, but pick up an underlying depression. The movement disorders, the handwriting, the ball catching, OT and physio. The learning skills involved with teachers. Medication that's needed will be the pediatrician or child psychiatrist. So there need to be multidisciplinary specialists who focus in this area. They need their in-service training. This is what this video is about, is an in-service program for those professionals and parents. And the development of resources. Now, I've talked about much of the material that's now available. A lot of it is on the internet, and I do recommend downloading the information. And sometimes parents know more about Asperger's syndrome than the professionals. I think that's a good thing, because they can pass the information on, and they are part of the team. They are the expert in their child. They know their developmental history, they know their personality, they have good intuition as what might and might not work. So they are valued members of that team. And the development of resources is crucial so that at schools, therapy libraries, etc., there is resource material to give you information. The next is parent support groups, and these are essential. Now, I have great pride in wearing the aspen leaf here. You may wonder, why has he got that thing? Well, Aspen is the United States Parent Support Organization for people with Asperger's syndrome. They have a website, they have a professional panel, and I'm sure they will be instrumental in changing attitudes, understanding, and government policies and resources for such people. So each country has its own large organization, but in smaller areas, in a town, like here in Las Vegas, would be a parent support group that shares strategies. Don't forget, it's not just professionals who have a good idea of what to do. Sometimes other parents come up with brilliant ideas as well, often very good common sense and cheaper ones. You need consumers' opinions on services. Which is a good school? And what we find that once a school has a reputation for kids with Asperger's syndrome, they get more than their fair share of people being attracted to that school. So it's a consumer's opinion on therapists, teachers, schools, etc. They provide education to the general population and professionals on this area, and act as a pressure group to gain appropriate services for such individuals, and they are often very good at political lobbying for such individuals. And I am certain that the progress of services in Queensland, where I come from, would not have been achieved without the parent support group giving legitimacy to what the professionals were doing, and that combined approach of parents and professionals was impossible for the politicians to ignore, and that's what gave us our services. It's also in-class support. Now, there may be a mixture of one-to-one tuition. When I talked about emotions, that's probably a one-to-one project. You don't have to teach the other kids that. They know that. So you need a one-to-one project on emotions. And small groups. Remember that you're focusing on cooperation, etc. It's a teacher aid, but my concern that many teachers are undertrained, underpaid, and undervalued. They are there to babysit, make sure they don't get into trouble, or do remedial reading or number work. No, it's the social curriculum is far more important. But that means that that teacher aide must be trained and supported. It's a flexible curriculum. Remember, it's a flexible teacher who in many ways is prepared to accommodate the child's differences and change the curriculum to accommodate that different way of thinking. It's quiet areas where that person can go for solitude. It's consistency in routine and consistency in emotionality. I find one of the successes with teachers is teachers who aren't moody. Okay? It doesn't matter if you are emotionally intense as long as you're consistently intense, so that the child can predict how you are emotionally going to react. It's not knowing is more frightening. And very much the transition from elementary to junior high and high school must be done successfully with a lot of planning, organization, and education of the next group of people. Certainly we found the first areas have been elementary schools with their maternal environment and their one-teacher classes have been much more responsive to accommodating such kids. It is more difficult at high school, where there are fewer people taking an interest in that individual. There is a greater emphasis on the curriculum and self-directed learning, and more predators per square inch than anywhere else. So you've got to have extra support at high school. We also look at career options for such individuals, and there are many positive qualities. One is a commitment to the work, and many I know will work through their lunch break. They will work after their allotted hours to make sure it's okay. It's their commitment to their work. It's not the socializing, it's what you produce. It's their knowledge can be phenomenal. They will know the details, etc. And what I explain is that in learning a career, they need to learn an activity that's needed, that people will come to you for the information rather than you have got to sell yourself to others. It's their dependability. They rarely take sickies because, sorry, an Australian term of sickies, a day off because of hangovers or other commitments. They are very determined to be punctual and dependable. Some have a strong sense of social justice, and not all develop into engineers and architects and I was going to say solicitors, but that has a different meaning for you here. It's a lawyer. But we say, because they have at airports, no soliciting, which I would love to play to my sister, who's actually a solicitor or lawyer on there. Okay, so they don't have to go into those areas. Some have a strong sense of social justice and go into caring professions, especially the girls, nursing, teaching, care of the elderly, and animals. And some into the police force. And as such, they're wonderful because they're incorruptible. But most of them go into traffic cops. Anyway, but there's a strong sense of social justice there. I do recommend, rather than the continuing college-type approach, which is very similar to school, is the medieval master apprenticeship training. And that is linking the person to a mature adult who's doing the activity, who takes them on as an apprentice, as a single apprentice, rather than a large class setting. Many are very good as self-employed because they then don't have to have that corporate responsibility, that teamwork which is a problem, and many have their partner, either their marriage partner, as their executive secretary and front to the general public, or they work in perhaps a large group, maybe they're in a large law firm, but what they have is a specialist knowledge in this particular form of law that they go away, find the research to brief the lawyer who's in court on this topic. Because the theatre of the court and reading the jury and the judge may be difficult, but the knowledge of the law in a book sense is phenomenal. So others, it is an academic career, and academia tolerates social eccentricities, and many find that their obscure interests are applauded in academia. So many, I suggest, that you will find your success eventually at university. Now finally, some other features important for a successful outcome, and that is finding a mentor for guidance and inspiration. It may be the high school physics teacher. It may be an engineer. It may be somebody brought in by the family because of an interest in art or whatever to tutor that excellence. Becomes a mentor, somebody to look up to, and somebody that has career options for that individual. So a mentor for guidance and inspiration. For some, it is eventually finding a partner who provides support, affection, and commitment. And some, as much as we may say at one end of the continuum is autism and Asperger's syndrome, at the other end of the continuum are people who are very socially skilled and empathic. And what we have here is they counterbalance that person and act as their social radar to script them and prepare them for what to do. So it's the two opposites may succeed, or their partner may share the same problems and difficulties, and so their relationship may be based on common interests. It's also looking for success at work or in the special interest. That success is then not measured by companionship, but by achievement. That I explain to adults, you are not a second-rate socialite, but a first-rate individual. And look at those positive aspects, that success at work is not by how well you socialize, but what you've actually achieved. And it's not wanting to be somebody you cannot be, and eventually coming to terms with one's strengths and deficits. So we very much focus on the positives. And for some, it is a natural recovery, where they learn what to do. It's not automatic, intuitive, and empathic, but they're there. And what they have done is they have learned over the decades how to camouflage their difficulties. So when you meet them, you would never know what they were like as children. And they have learnt to socialize and get by in social circumstances. For the trained eye, you know that moment's hesitation, that having to quickly think what to say and repair. But as such, like a tortoise and hare, they are the tortoise that has eventually got their socializing and worked it out. So I hope at the end of this workshop and video that you have worked out about Asperger's syndrome, and to applaud such individuals that I described as though they have come from a different culture. And we must teach them our social culture, but we must not destroy their own culture, and have pride in the heroes who have Asperger's syndrome. Okay, thank you.